And it was at that time that I started to realize that we had really been lied to,
Hmm.
that the whole premise of the women's liberation movement was a lie. And I started thinking about my own mother. My mother was the most wonderful, the kindest person I've ever met, kind to everybody, you know, and it was a stay-at-home mom, wonderful, wonderful woman. And I really started to think about, here I have like the best mom in the world, and I've been listening to people tell me that being a mother is slavery.
Welcome to another episode of Currents Podcast. My name is Carolina Allen, and I am here with my dear friend Maddi Cheers. And we are so excited to be sharing about this concept of what we call life culture. And at Big Ocean Women, we talk about how the choices we make impact and ripple outward. And a lot of them start from deep within us, even our wombs, and then they ripple out to impact our families and then our communities and even the ecological world. And that's what we like to call life culture. And so this month, that's what we're talking about. And Maddi, my dear friend Maddi, is here. I know she's been on before, and we just love your insights, Maddi. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure.
I just wanted to share a few things. Maddie's amazing as a thinker, as a philosopher. She's a poet, an author of a book. She's the founder of the Women's Oneness Project. She helps youth to learn more about Native American religion and philosophy, and it's just a beautiful work that you do, Maddi. Can you share a little bit about that?
Well, with my husband, we have a company called Journeys into American Indian Territory, and we go into schools. And mostly we're sharing the culture of the Northeast. I live in New York. So the curriculum here in New York and Connecticut has to do with that. And we share it through traditional stories, traditional games, and a big museum that we bring with us. But the way we get to do this is because we've been adopted into several different native families from here in the East, the Lenape. We also have adopted families out in Oklahoma who are Plains Indian people. And when we share this program, everything we do with permission. And I sometimes speak of us as a covert operation because when we story tell, we do the explanation of the culture itself. There's no explaining native culture without talking about the creator.
Hmm.
And the ones we've had a couple schools that haven't had us back for one reason or another. We did have one school that wouldn't have us back because we mentioned the creator. They would only have us back if we didn't mention the
Wow.
creator. And I thought it was very interesting because I felt like if I'm going to describe your culture and and I want to be true to you, I want to tell the truth about who you are. You cannot describe the Cheyenne or the Haudenosaunee or the Lenape or the Kiowa or any of the families that we are adopted into, the Comanche, the Cherokee. You can't describe any of that without the reference to the creator because they don't believe there is any existence without a connection to the creator. And those people who end up being on the wrong end of things, that end up doing what we would commonly call evil, it's because they have disconnected from the creator. So to try and explain their culture without understanding that connection, I mean, I'm perfectly happy if you don't want to hear it, if you choose, oh no, I can't talk about the creator in school, I can't, whatever, that's fine. That's your choice. But then don't ask me to go by your rules in describing someone's culture. That's kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
that's
It's impossible. It's impossible to do that because
impossible.
it's an entirely different paradigm that you can't even begin to explain because it's
Right.
foundational. It's like the core.
Exactly.
Everything's connected to
Exactly.
it. Well, one thing I
That's
love in particular, Maddie, is that you guys are in the schools, and at Big Ocean Women, we talk all about motherhood and we promote
mm,
motherhood. And we define mother as any woman that has the best interests of the rising generation at heart. And
Yes.
that's exactly what you're doing. You are educating and teaching principles and, this beautiful indigenous worldview that is needed in the world today to heal so many aspects of our broken society. And it has a tremendous ripple effect generationally. And that's one of the things I love, and I connect so closely with you because you have that vision and you've put that effort in. Um,
Right.
so this month we're really talking about the impacts of what we call the three environments. It's the womb,
Mhm.
the home, and then everything else that comes, from the home outward, whether it's community or even the ecological environment. And you have a really powerful story, Maddie, that I would love to have you share with our audience today because I think it's so relevant. And we'll, talk about the relevance and different components of it. But I just wanted to turn the time over to you to share your
Okay.
story and
Sure.
where you've been and come from.
I'll be happy to. So I'm 71 now, but I was around and marching during the Vietnam era, during the women's liberation movement, during Roe v. Wade. So I was there. I was there for the whole 9 yards, right? And down in Washington often. And recently, I would say probably since around the time I ended up meeting you, which I feel is like divine intervention and destiny, of new wave feminists. I mean, that whole meeting, I think, was very important in my life story. So, of course, when I was involved in the alleged, and I do say alleged, women's liberation movement, we were told that being a wife and being a mother was like the worst thing. That was you're a slave, you're giving up your potential, you could be so much more. And then of course that segued into the abortion movement,
Mhm. Mhm.
and Roe v. Wade. So now what very few young people know is that when we marched for Roe v. Wade, the sign said, and I'm sure you can look up pictures of this, safe, legal, and rare. Okay,
Yeah.
safe,
Mhm.
legal, and rare.
Mhm.
So the idea really was very em- empathetic towards poor women who were having back alley abortions. That was the story. That was everything we heard about. And we just had to go and save them, right?
Yeah.
And we had to give them the opportunity to be all they could be without being tied down to being married or mothers or, things like that.
Yeah.
So I, when I was 19, I found myself pregnant. And at that time, Maryland did not have abortion facilities, but Washington, D.C. is. So I went to D.C. to a Planned Parenthood. And I have to say, I was very early and they did give me a whole brochure. This is so interesting compared to today. And I'll tell you my
Mhm.
story from today in a second.
Okay.
So I got a whole brochure that showed the development of the fetus, that talked about government programs that were available to me should I decide to keep the child, that talked about where I could get counseling. They would give me counseling. They sat down, they talked to me to make sure this was something I really wanted. They were very kind and very compassionate.
Mhm.
And and like I said, I was by the time they tested me, I was at about 5 weeks. So I was like, okay, I'm okay with that. I can see what that looks like in a little brochure picture. I think I'm good with that. And then so then I had the abortion and life was going along swimmingly. But moved to New York to pursue becoming an actress and a dancer and all of that. And then I got pregnant again. And during that one, I was like, there was a moment in my brain that went, "What are you doing?" And both times, to be perfectly honest, both times it was one night stands.
Mhm.
So, which I find really interesting as I look back on this. But I thought, and it wasn't that I hadn't had long-term boyfriends in between.
Mhm.
Both times one night stands, both times on the pill.
Wow.
And and my whole thing with the pill right now, that's a whole other story. But
Right.
uh, But so I did end up having the abortion again. I was very early, but when I went to Planned Parenthood this time, there was no sitting down, there was no talking, there was making the appointment, paying your money, going in the room, having the procedure. There were no brochures, there was nothing. So we're only talking 19 to 25. What's that? 6 years later, right?
Wow. Hmm.
So that struck me. And then what I really started to think about personally was, why am I making these choices? Why is this a choice I'm making to sleep around? Why is this empowering? Is this helpful? What am I doing?
Right.
You know, and I went into therapy. I did go. Now I've always had a very strong belief in God. So let me also throw that in here. When I was 5 years old, I was laying on the bed and I looked up and and I was not dreaming, the whole ceiling like opened up and I saw circles and circles and circles with stars all around. It was very dark. And I ran downstairs and I told my mom, I said, Mom, you know what? The whole universe is circles and circles, circles connecting, circles
Mm,
inside each other. It's all circles. And my mother was like, mm-hmm. It's like, okay. But
that's
I, I,
powerful that even at a
I
young
know.
age, you had this tether to the divine and, the universe, and it was speaking to you.
Right.
Mhm,
Right. So I've always had that connection and I have always believed in God. I have always talked to God.
mhm,
When I was little, even if we would say our prayers and I would go to bed and I would talk with God about whatever was bothering me from the time I was like 5,
yeah,
so always that never left me. So then when that second abortion happened, I was like, well, this is not me. This is not God. Where am I getting what is happening in my brain that
mhm,
I'm making this decision that I think this is a good way to live? This is not me. That was my overwhelming feeling, was like, this is not me. So I did go into therapy with a wonderful man, Stephen Adler, who's no longer around, but an amazing and beautiful, phenomenal therapist, very spiritual, very, very funny, and we talked about that idea of living with integrity. So, so what does bother somebody who does believe in God and does believe in spirit about the idea of having an abortion is that if you're connected to God, you're all about life.
right,
So if your premise is, I promote everything that has to do with life, even when you look at new agey stuff, they tell you, which I did a lot of growing, up and especially in my 20s, anything that promotes life and promotes growth is good. Anything that doesn't is not good, is not the right path to enlightenment. So I think that's when I first started to think about it. And I made a major behavioral change and left behind that whole idea that if you have sex with somebody, it means you're in love or you love, or it means you're an adult. And it was at that time that I started to realize that we had really been lied to,
mm,
that the whole premise of the women's liberation movement was a lie. And I started thinking about my own mother. My mother she's passed now, but she was the most wonderful, the kindest person I've ever met, kind to everybody, you know, and it was a stay at home mom. She didn't work until, I mean, I was out of college. I think she decided to work for and help it and supported a center for the mentally ill to get them transitioned from institutions into the community. Wonderful, wonderful woman. And I really started to think about, here I have like the best mom in the world, and I've been listening to people tell me that being a mother is slavery.
yeah,
And I'm like, now wait a minute. And I would talk with Steve about all of this, and we would agree that what was going on inside of me, I mean, maybe somebody else can accept that. Let's say that. But what that did for me is it made a conflict.
yeah,
I was trying to act out what my peer groups, oh, you should be able to have sex with anybody you want and have pleasure whenever you want. And, so you can, if you get pregnant, you can have an abortion because it's like birth control, and, you're entitled to it. It's your right. Don't think about it. And that really is the message. I mean,
And it's
let
also the message is like you can divorce yourself from your consequences. That
Mhm.
you can choose whatever and you can divorce yourself from those consequences, and that is a
Right.
very big fat lie. Like,
Yes.
it things don't really work out that way
No,
in reality. So,
no,
interesting.
they really don't. So then I started to look at, along that line.
Mhm.
I started to look just, as I got older, I'd been on the pill for a while. And then somewhere along the line on my own, I realized, well, this is a stupid idea. You know, I'm like pumping myself full of chemicals. I'm going to do God knows what. And, I went on the pill when it first came out. So it was when it was that Noralester. It was
Experimental.
like hugely, yeah. That's what I felt like. So I'm a guinea pig for a drug company. Okay. So I quit that.
Mhm.
And, and after the second one, and then I started to really, I feel like that the upside of the second abortion, and also in comparison with seeing the way it was handled in the 6 years, I feel like the upside of that was my lesson to go on a path of spiritual integrity.
Mm.
And for me, if you're going to make a statement like, everything that is good supports life and
Mhm.
supports growth.
Mm.
And that's true. You look out in the world. I mean, just look at nature.
Yeah.
All nature is constantly in harmony. It's constantly in balance, right? It's really not about survival of the fittest. It's about survival of the most adaptable. And there is nothing, zero things in nature, zero. And I do believe when Native Americans say that nature is our teacher, there are zero things in nature that 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 do anything that is anti-life. And I don't want to talk about predators. Somebody always bring that up with me. Well, what about predators? Well, they have to survive, so they eat, but they never eat more than they need, and there are always more prey than predators. So, it's the circle of life. It's the
Mhm.
balance.
Mhm.
So what I realized is that, okay, well, this whole abortion movement, this is really out of balance.
Mhm.
And then I find out that it's become a multi-billion-dollar industry. I
Mhm.
just had a discussion with a friend this morning. And what's happening is, and I'm going to fast forward because I can't go through the whole story. You've got the basic idea of how I came to this, but
Mhm.
um, so what's happening is you've got this multi-billion-dollar industry lying to women about the power of their womb. So now, but you know me, I'm a big proponent of the divine feminine and
Mhm.
where that intersects with the divine masculine. And the when you start, it doesn't matter what culture I do a lot of looking at Celtic culture. You can look at Native American culture, the Mother Earth. The womb is the center of the woman's power. I mean, before agriculture, God was perceived as a woman. And, there are terms in traditional indigenous peoples like the great womb of the universe. So the womb is our power. That's where our energetic power center is. So if you disrespect that, you are denying your power as a woman.
Mm.
And it's not just the abortion that is disrespectful of that. It is, and certainly, there have been men that have, certainly there are patriarchal things, not to overuse the term, where women haven't been honored and haven't been looked at as equal. I am not saying there are many, many reasons why women feel dishonored, but we as women have to recognize that connection to the power of our womb. It is everything that connects us to the creator. Why else do women who are together start to get their period on the moon cycle together. Every job I've ever had where I've been with a bunch of, we all get our periods together. I
Mhm.
don't have a job anymore. I also don't have my period because menopause, which I love, kind of liked being in menopause. And what I, not that I'll tell you about the regret part of that, but it's a cool time because you finally feel like, and I get to say all these things I learned.
Mhm.
So, so whether you're looking at it from a particular religious point of view, the idea that I always love the way the Lakota put it, women are considered spiritually above men because they are the life givers and men are the life takers. And in order for men to get back into balance, there are ceremonies they need to perform. There are different things they need to do to keep everything in balance. And that's what we do not have in our culture. We are not talking about keeping things in balance. And as far as lying to young women, just about, when was this, about a year ago, a friend of mine was telling me about her girlfriend who was working for an abortion service and she got pregnant and she didn't know what to do,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And her friend, who is not abortion minded, but pro choice, talked to her. But ultimately, she decides she's going to have the abortion. And she does. She goes, has the abortion at her clinic. She feels horrible afterwards. She's really sad. And they tell, this is what they said to her. Well, take a few days off to get over it and then come back. So take a few days off to get over it and then come back. And I have to say, it's very interesting because her choice was not to come back. And she's young. She's like maybe at the time 27 or something. And I've never met her. This is a story I'm hearing from my good friend who's like 30 and is her friend. But she was saying that my friend was saying, I can't even believe this. I can't believe this is the way they treated her.
Mhm.
This is what they said to her, that there was no acknowledgement of the pain she was feeling, of the fact that she was already regretting the decision. So there was no compassion, just come on, get over it.
Well, I think
So
that that's, like, the outcome of a society that has also bought the lie that,
yeah,
it's just a clump of cells and it's just, a regular medical procedure and, go and, slap a Band-Aid on it and get on with your life, like, it's not a big
yeah,
deal. And so I think that a society that promotes abortion ultimately doesn't doesn't hold that kind of sensitivity. It's unable to
mm-mm,
hold that kind of sensitivity to wounds and violence, at that
right.
core level. They just don't know what to do with it.
No, they
Mhm.
don't. They truly do not. And now that we know from science that at conception, there is like an electrical spark that happens.
Yeah.
It then becomes your entire electromagnetic field, which we all have, right?
Yeah.
So, which is what connects us to the Earth's electromagnetic field, et cetera, et cetera. But what is so fascinating to me about this is that even as we have this new science, even as we know that some people are rightly traumatized by the experience of an abortion,
Mhm.
there's been no adjustment in the industry, and it is an industry. Just this morning, I was talking to a friend about this, and we were saying, why are they even charging women for an abortion? They are taking your baby, your your fetus, which they don't let you call it a baby. So they're taking your fetus and they're selling it for medical research.
Mhm.
And then they're referring to it as medical waste.
Yeah.
You know? So on the back end, they're taking if you want to get, this is what my friend this morning told me, that if you want to get your placenta, so you've had your abortion, you want to get your placenta, which if there's a placenta, it's a late term abortion, which I can't even deal with, but Do you want to get your placenta? You're going to have to pay that abortion clinic 30 grand. In the
Really?
meantime,
Wow.
that's yours, your placenta. You want to go bury it. You want to do whatever ceremony you want. This is what she told me. I have not had time to research this, but this is what she learned from a friend of hers from a particular abortion clinic. It was not a Planned Parenthood one. It was, but she would have to pay that
Hmm.
30 grand to get her placenta back.
Mm-hmm.
Now, aside from the fact that isn't it hers to begin with,
Mm-hmm.
like, what are you selling that for to medical research that you are charging a woman that you have also charged to have the
Right.
abortion 30 grand to buy her placenta back?
It's a commodification on all fronts, to be honest,
Mm.
because I mean, even before the abortion happens, we know that through comprehensive sexuality education, just the educational, uh, the kind of pro-abortion education that they're promoting in schools and,
Right,
you know, junior highs and high schools and everywhere, that sets up for, you know, risky sexuality that then will
right.
end up in a pregnancy. And then so they're commodifying on every single level.
Hmm.
And I think that what you said is so important, Maddie, and I'd love to revisit it, that the womb is the center of the female power.
Yes,
And if you have a society that's kind of framed around obscuring that power, making it seem like it's actually your Achilles heel, so to speak. And for
right.
you to be powerful, you have to negate that power. I mean, that's the ultimate lie. And I feel like
Yes,
how different would the world look if we had this mass awakening within women that we took these scales from our eyes and we were able to see that truly this power to create life is the greatest power of all. And if we safeguarded it in ourselves and in each other, and
yes.
that became the norm, everything would change. Everything would change because we
Everything.
we would hold the power, this kind of like you said, it is overused, but these patriarchal systems that are hell bent on war and on commodification and on lies, they couldn't get very far because we would be the gatekeepers within
Right,
society.
right,
And I love that the Haudenosaunee, talk about this, that within a society, it's the grandmothers, the women who have lived a lifetime and now hold all this wisdom that put the people in positions of power within that community and
right,
are the watchers of it. I just think that it turns from being a society based on these fabrications and lies and this power hungry structure to one of peace and harmony and collaboration and it's a maternal, you know, power dynamic that is elevated.
right.
And I feel like that's what Big Ocean that's why we connect so well, Maddie, is because that's the vision that Big Ocean Women has, is
Yeah,
that when women can awaken to that power, then everything changes.
everything.
Mhm.
You look at the sarcasm and self-centeredness of and outright trying to look for the word they're just mean. I mean, the tone of the discussion, if you challenge the idea that abortion is the only way that we as women could possibly breathe free and enjoy our lives the same as men do. And my response to this is, why do I want to enjoy my life the same as men do?
Yeah.
I'm not a man,
Mhm.
you know? I don't. And if we're going to elevate life all over the planet, then saying that, oh, well, we should be able to go out and have sex with anybody we want to because men can. So what does that make them go? Haven't we for ages and ages and ages and ages referred to men who sleep around as dogs? You know, we do not refer to them in a positive way. So you're saying to women who have the power of the womb, the power of giving birth, the power of bringing life into the world, and saying to them, you got to go out there and act like a dog. You get to go be the lowest interpretation of what it means to be male.
Yeah.
Because real men, men who are connected to the divine, men who are connected to the masculine the divine masculine as they grow older, don't behave that way.
Mm-mm.
They take responsibility for themselves and for others. And they're not in it 24/7 for pleasure.
Yeah.
I'm not writing songs about it. Some of the songs that have come out that people think empower women because they're talking about how women are having sex right and left. I'm like, how is this empowering?
Yeah.
How is this empowering?
I think
That
I
we're
think it's just critical to see the lie. I
see
think
the
that it's
lie.
worth connecting the dots that there's like the direction that humanity is heading when we erase women's unique biological power, the power to create life, is completely anti-woman. Like there is no place for us in this future
That's right.
because everything will collapse into this male-centeredness, impotent, transhumanist kind of virtual reality where
Right.
you get to create your universe all virtual. None of it is real and substantial. Our
Exactly.
world and our real reality here is tethered to the feminine capacity. And so for us to deny what actually makes us unique, which is the power of life, um, we have no future in this other world.
That's right.
So we have to wake each other up to recognize this internal power, and then we have to proclaim it and safeguard it on every front. And
Exactly.
I think that I wish every young woman could hear what you have to say because it's so critical right now that young women can understand that the future that's being designed for us doesn't have any place for us. Like
No.
they're trying to promote women in STEM and come and be the designers of all of this, technological, the fifth industrial revolution or whatever, and that you can be part of it. So they're trying to recruit all of these women to be like the quote unquote designers. But in reality, like there's no place for our actual physical female bodies in it except for
Right.
being manipulated and commodified in some way or another. There's no role for us to play.
No.
And it's kind of crunch time, wouldn't you think, Maddie? Like we're kind of
No, I
society's
definitely
like,
think it's crunch time, which is why I feel I must speak out about this at my age, because I know,
yeah.
and I know, at I'm very close with my grandnieces and grandnephew, and grandniece and grandnephew, and my nieces and my nephews, and I love having been a part of their life, but I definitely think about if I had gone through therapy a little bit earlier and gotten over the things that had made me afraid and feel unsafe about getting pregnant or being a mother,
Mhm.
I think about, wow, what would it have been like to at least have a kid, even one,
Yeah.
to have a child and then to have actual grandchildren that are my grandchildren. And it's not that I love I couldn't love my grandchildren and my nieces and nephews anymore if I tried. But there is a difference when it is your own child. There has to be through your own body because everything is energy.
Mhm.
Everything in the universe. Nikola Tesla was the first one to point that out. You cannot understand the universe unless you understand energy
Yeah.
and vibration. You
Mhm.
cannot do it. So, so there has to be a difference if you have been the one to give birth and the child in front of you came through you.
And even I heard that, you know, you're a mother far before the baby's actually born. Like
Mhm.
the cells in your body behave differently and recognize that there is life within you. And
Right?
there's no other time that we have on the planet where there's 2 spirits within one human being.
Yeah.
And I'm learning a lot about, epigenetics, and there's a lot of science, coming out regarding, what happens pre-birth. And
Yeah.
they're realizing that, the consciousness and the awareness of the life can fluctuate from, being aware of everything happening around the mother to the mother's emotions and feelings, you know, inside the mother, and then its own, um, independent personality. And it's like when a woman is pregnant, she's at her most vulnerable, but also she's at her most powerful, because this life is kind of this energetic field is kind of all around her as this baby is experiencing the world that she's experiencing and the internal thoughts and emotions that she's feeling, and then also has this independent, unique personality that is timeless, the spirit.
Right.
And I often think, and this is information that I'm also recently learning as well, and I wish every woman had this experience and this knowledge, and also all of the people that surround every pregnant woman had this knowledge, because the violence that a woman feels, as she's pregnant, the emotions, the burdens that she carries, um, become a part of that newborn's world as well.
Mhm.
And so when we talk about violence, sometimes we just think about physical violence that happens, but
Right.
the environment in which a woman finds herself when she's pregnant, needs to be one of nurturing, needs to be one of care, needs to be one,
Right.
right? And so I
Right.
think that no woman wakes up one day or when she's a little girl and, esteems that, oh, the thing that I just really want to accomplish in my life or that I want to do or become is to have an abortion. It's an extremely violent action, and women don't make that direction unless they feel like it's their only one. And
Yeah.
you tell a woman that her future is completely gone if she goes through with this pregnancy
Yes.
is just as violent of an ideology as you can possibly create.
Right.
And our society has really worked hard to make that the reality for so many young women.
Yes. And when you look at indigenous people, even today, they don't leave their children behind. In my experience,
Mhm.
the people that I know and am related to by adoption, when a young woman in the family has gotten pregnant out of wedlock, they don't even think about the idea of having an abortion because they have their whole family around them to support them.
Right.
They even today, it seems unusual to us because that isn't the everyday experience of most of us. Most of us are still living with that John Wayne syndrome. you know, we got to go out there and strike it out on our own, and no support. We're good. But when you look at indigenous cultures, that tradition has actually been carried through. And the tradition has been that we support the woman who's going to have the child and we support the child. And when the woman is it has to raise the child, she's got her sisters and her aunties around. It's the community that is there to help if there's an issue, if there's some problem. So I talked to a very well-known spiritual leader for the Haudenosaunee once about this idea about how do they feel about abortion, and they said, well, he said, "Well, we don't support it. We are not supporting it. We raise our children to understand the meaning of life and life's connection to the creator," which sort of goes back to what I started with, that
Mhm.
that all life, that when a woman gets pregnant, whether it's within the marriage or not with the marriage, that is the creator, that is the miracle of the creator trying to bring more life into the world. So what he was saying was, I would never tell someone not to have the abortion if they really felt like it. He said, but what I do is I will talk to them and get them to tell me why are you having those feelings? And then talk to their grandmother and talk and their aunties and talk to them and to make sure what are you dealing with, and letting them know the community is going to support you. We're going to love your baby. We're going to, it's going to be wonderful. And this gentleman, one of his children, is actually the daughter of his sister, who was very ill when she had the baby, and she had drug problems.
Mhm.
And so he took the baby in, and
Yeah,
she is now, I mean, I've known her since she was, what, 8, I think, and she's now married and has her own kids, and gorgeous, healthy young woman,
yeah.
wonderful, brilliant young woman. And I I think that is also the piece we are missing in our culture, is that we don't make women feel like there is a community around them that will support them if they find themselves unmarried and pregnant, and that values them as a human being, and and can make it clear, and we're going to value the life of your child, whether you need to give that child up for adoption or you're going to be in the community. We're
I
all there for you.
I think that's exactly it, is that and this is what Big Ocean Women has said from the very beginning, is that, you know, our faith, and like you mentioned, the Native American faith tradition of having a creator as being central, our
Mm.
family, which is, you know, and our identities as life creators, that if you take those things away, you're left with something that really takes that spark from living. And
Yeah.
it is what makes us human, to be honest. Things as being the millstone around women's necks,
Mhm.
we don't have our best interests at heart if they're framing
No, of
things that way. Which isn't to say that in those areas, women can't be used as well and can't be hurt and harmed, but that's
course.
where you start to fix. That's what you need to fix. So if
Right,
you have, a faith tradition that isn't value you as, this unique life bringer and a creative, person, then that's where you have to start the healing. If your family, we can't
right,
it does no good for society. So for example, let's
right.
say that, a tree has some kind of a sickness. Okay, well then let's just, sever it from its roots, cut off its branches. It's just going to be a lifeless stump. Like you have to
Mhm.
get at those root problems and then fix them. But the solution isn't to just cut them all away.
Right.
I think that I really want this rising generation to realize, and I feel like there's something about this generation where young people today are really wanting to heal, which is such a beautiful thing. What
No,
I
I
find really unique about this rising generation is that they want to stop violence, from eating clean, being ecologically conscious about where they're buying products and this and that. So there's this real desire for them to walk in nonviolent paths. The only thing I would love to point out is that our sexuality is key. It's like the foundation of where that
yes.
nonviolence starts. So
Yes.
girls, young women, if if you're not aligning yourself and your sexuality and realizing how powerful that is and walking circumspectly, in harmony with that power, then you are in essence, behaving in very violent ways that then will
Right.
ripple out in even more violent ways and more violent ways. And so it all starts right there. And I love,
Yeah.
Maddie, that you've kind of come full circle from realizing, whoa, I'm being really lied to here. And I'm going to do that kind of healing work to make sure that I don't perpetuate this any further. And
Right.
it's an amazing journey that you've been on, and I love that you now get to, um, bring the wisdom that you've experienced to this rising generation in your work and also as an auntie, with your nieces and nephews, and it's a critical thing that you're doing.
It is, and I think, it's very interesting to me that just a few years ago, we started spiritually talking about how this is the time of the feminine.
Yes.
This is the time when the divine feminine is supposed to be rising. If you're
Mhm.
in those circles, this was talked about a lot.
Yeah.
And what are we seeing? As far as I can tell, there is a war on the divine feminine. There's a war on women.
Yeah.
This
100%.
this this nonsense, and it is nonsense, that you can't define what a woman is,
Yeah.
and that you're going to define a woman based on a man is going to tell you I'm a woman, and then I, as a woman, talk about taking away my power.
Talk about
You want to
gaslighting.
show me that I, as a woman who has gone through menstruation, who has also been sexually abused as a child, which I, I'm just putting that in so everybody knows my biography also comes
Mhm.
from there,
Yeah.
which has to do with why I ended up where I ended up. But you're going to tell me that somebody who's never been through menstruation, somebody who's never had the energy of a womb, right? And what that
Mhm.
means in terms of the energetic, divine, feminine connection,
Mhm.
right? Somebody who has never been afraid to walk down a street
Mhm.
because of being looked at as less than because they're a woman
Mhm.
and possibly grabbed and possibly raped. You never grew up with that fear. You did not. And I, being my age, believe me, there were, you had to learn self defense. I mean, there were when I lived in New York City, there were streets you walked down where I used to have a dance bag. I was a dancer. So I used to have, I, I got mugged like 3 times.
Oh my
So I had
goodness.
this dance bag. I didn't get hurt because I feel like I have a very strong survival instinct. But,
Mhm.
I mean, I got grabbed by this man came out from between the buildings, came and grabbed me. I had my dance bag on my opposite, which had tons of stuff in it, including my clogs. And I just wheeled around and whacked him with it. And he went back and I ran. I got to the bus stop. I get home. So this is before cell phones. I get home and I call the police and I say to them, I think there's a guy who might be hurt on 57th Street. And the policeman goes, okay, goodbye. I said, would you need my name? No, goodbye. And eventually I realized if I had given him my name, because I heard this like crack, like maybe his head hit the brick wall or something. If I'd given him my name, I would have been the one arrested, even
Oh,
though he
wow.
wanted to
Yeah.
assaulted me. So
Yeah.
yes, we have to get away from that. We have to teach our young men that no, women aren't just a piece of meat, but how do you teach that if you're telling women go out and sleep with anybody and have as much pleasure as guys have?
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's like there's no that it's there's no integrity in that message. There's no
100%.
love in that
It
message.
doesn't
There's no
make any
self love.
sense. It's just illogical. Anyone that can reason, that message is just it's not gonna get us where we all want to be.
No,
Um
it's selfish and it's self-centered. Yet we've talked about the Haudenosaunee. When the Haudenosaunee talk about the character qualities of leaders, of
Mhm.
elders, of
Mhm.
wisdom keepers, they say they must be peaceful, kind, respectful, responsible, honest,
Mm.
unselfish, and humble.
Mm.
You know, if you're just running around thinking, well, how much pleasure can I get? I mean, what can I do for me? What's
Mhm.
good for me? You know, where does that lead to being honest and self? The first person you have to be honest with is yourself.
Yeah, definitely that's a self-destructive path that you're on. It's a very
Hmm.
violent path, and
Hmm.
I think that yeah, we're living in such a beautiful and critical time right now. I
Yeah.
know that the message and the experiences you had are going to resonate with our listeners today. And it's my prayer that young women and young men that listen to this podcast episode can ask themselves the critical question: where is my life heading? Is it on a nonviolent path, or am I heading down, a violent path? And
Right.
stop. You can stop, and you can, just like you did, you can ask yourself the question, where am I heading? What am I doing? And you have
Yep.
that power to carve out the future that you want. And I want to testify that if you can just stop for a minute and be self-reflective and take a moment to center yourself and ask yourself those critical questions, that you have the power to carve out your own trajectory and to make, that shift in your
Exactly.
life. You can do that, and you will find tremendous joy, tremendous peace and harmony, just as you have, Maddie. And just in wrapping up, could you share just, a last 1-minute message for any of our listeners, young people who are being really sold this lie just from every possible angle? What do you have to say to them?
Well, I would say number one, see if you have somebody in your life you consider a wisdom keeper, a real, an elder, somebody who's lived longer than you, who has a lot of experiences, and just talk to them. Even if you go to an old age home, think
Yeah.
how much good that would do,
Mhm.
right? And then my other really quick piece of advice is the next time you find yourself in that victim mentality of going, well, they made me do it, you know,
Mhm.
it's just stop for a second and go, I made me do it.
Yeah.
Nobody is making you, nobody has the power over you to make a choice that is going to ultimately hurt you, that is ultimately against what you believe and what you know. No, and if you are going, if your excuse is going to be, well, everybody around me was, I mean, the need to belong is very strong when you're a
Yeah.
teenager. I definitely understand that. I was there. It- But when you talk to people who are older, we'll all be able to tell you it's no, nobody has that power over you.
Mhm.
Don't think they made me do it. You made you do it, and then find out why you made you do it.
That's brilliant.
Especially whatever you did is not in your own best interest.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Maddie. I feel like every time you and I get to chat and get to talk, I'm so grateful for you. I'm grateful even for the painful experiences that you've had to live through, because they have given you a specific sensitivity and wisdom, to pass on to my generation and to others. And I'm just so grateful for the lived experiences and the knowledge that you've been able to gather, and for you being so generous and sharing that with people, and through poetry, through these educational classes, through your books. Thank you so much. And can you share a little bit about your book and then your next project
Oh,
with us?
my book is called The Mandala Meditations, and what happened when I went into therapy for the second time, which was about 20 years ago, I had a major league anxiety attack, like serious anxiety attack. And I found a wonderful therapist, Celeste, who again also very spiritual, along with being a Jungian therapist and a Gestalt therapist. So, so when I found her, she suggested what happened was I had that memory of the sexual abuse that had
Mm,
happened when I was a child. And it, like in a flash, was like there. And so when I went into therapy with her, I couldn't do that thing where, where you meditate, like you meditate and look at a candle. Not for me. Didn't work.
mhm,
So she suggested that, like Carl Jung, I draw mandalas, which are circular pictures, right? And from the moment I started doing that, I would hear like two lines of poetry in my head. And
wow.
and I would keep drawing, and then I would realize the drawing was done, and then I would write the 2 lines, and I would write, and then I would just keep writing.
Wow.
and writing and writing. And they all rhyme perfectly. They're all in two particular cadences. And in the beginning, I know that the messages were for me. These were guidance from the divine on how to live my life, how to deal with this, how to be courageous enough to face these memories
Mm.
and deal with the ramifications of them. And then after a while, I realized they are messages for the world.
Wow.
So once I realized that about 3 years ago, I guess 4 years ago now, I started to put it all together into a book. And the book is out. It's called The Mandala Meditations and came out last year. It's on Amazon. And you can get it very inexpensive. Yeah, Kindle if you're interested. But also, now I made it into a shorter coloring book with the phenomenally talented kind of Sharma, and that'll be out in April. But now I'm looking at it as a way of using the poetry and the meditation and the coloring and the drawing as a way to activate in you what it activated in me,
Hmm.
which is a deeper knowledge of my connection to the divine, to the creator, and using that guidance for the rest of my life.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. That's what I mean by your generous gifts. Thank you so much, Maddie. It's such a pleasure to talk with you. And thank you, listeners, for joining us today. And
Thank
I
you.
hope, I hope that continue to tune in. We so appreciate you. And we're always praying for your, blessings and well-being. And thanks so much.
Thank you, Carolina.
Thank you for listening, and if this conversation was meaningful to you, please consider sharing and inviting others to listen. Join us next time for a conversation with Diane and Alina Fisher, who throw baby showers for women who have unplanned pregnancies so that these mothers can feel support in their decision to support life.